Welcome to Some Guy's Garage. A long time ago, about a year ago now, I promised when I was doing the video for this folding workbench that I would do a garage tour when I hit 1,000 subscribers. So I'm well past that now, and I probably owe you guys a garage tour. I'm going to kind of walk through layout, some of the mechanical stuff, and just different features of the garage. I'll kind of touch on a few different areas, but walk you through all how I've set this up and what I do in here and how it works and all of that sort of thing. So let's get started with that. I'm going to start with dimensions. The garage itself is 18 feet wide, 20 feet deep to this back wall, and then there's an extra 6 by 12 cutout. That, when we were building, could have been a mudroom as part of the house. This is an attached garage, but we opted instead to do a workshop just to give me some extra space to keep all the tools and have a workbench and stuff while I still can get vehicles in here. So one of the things I've really wanted all along is to be able to always park 2 vehicles. And given that it's 18 feet wide and there's 2 feet taken up by all the shelving and stuff along this wall, it only gives me 16 feet to park. I can squeeze 2 vehicles in here, but it's not great. So it's wonderful when you're working, like if I'm using the lift or anything like that, there's plenty of space to walk around the vehicles. But for parking 2 vehicles, it's tight, but that's kind of been my constraint and has kept me from, let's say, overflowing this wall with too much stuff. It all has to stay fairly narrow. But overall, there's about 440 square feet of space. Most of that, like I said, is for parking, but at least there's enough to have some room for some tools and equipment and workspace. So next thing I want to touch on is heating, cooling, and insulation. So starting off with the door, it's a 16 by 8, but it is insulated. It's an R12 insulation in the doors. There's R14 in this wall here, which is an outside wall. The rest of the walls, all of this sort of stuff, and the ceiling as well, is shared with the house. So it is an attached garage, like I said. So these are all actually R22, which is code up here for exterior walls on a house. And then because there is living space above the garage here, the ceiling has spray foam at an R32, which is also code here. So it's fairly well insulated, and in general, even without heating it, will stay above freezing throughout the winter. We are in Canada here, we get cold winters, but there's enough insulation and I guess just general heat radiating from the house that it does stay warm enough in the winter that it doesn't need to be heated consistently to stay above freezing. But when I am out here, there is a heater. So it's a 45,000 BTU natural gas Mr. Heater, typical hanging unit furnace. Works well enough, plenty to heat up the space. Takes maybe half an hour when it's cold outside to get it up to a comfortable working temperature. The other thing I have is opposite here on the wall is a fan that just helps move and circulate the air around. So kind of pushes the air from one side to the corner and then back this way across to the workspace. So keeps a good circulation in here and the heat from just sinking up, or not sinking up, but floating up to the ceiling. And then the one other piece of kind of HVAC related equipment is a little exhaust fan here. So this is actually just a regular bathroom fan. I kind of drywalled in and punched out a hole. This wasn't something that we actually had built into the garage when it was first here, but gives me about 100 cubic feet a minute of exhaust. And there's a separate switch with a timer here so that I can kind of leave it on and pull out any fumes from stuff, or even just to dry stuff out when it's pretty humid from pulling in a wet vehicle or something like that. As you can see, the floor even now, I just pulled the vehicles out and is damp just because it is winter and we pull in slush and they drip and all of that sort of stuff. So having exhaust here just helps to keep the thing from getting too moist and humid in the garage. Next, we can talk a little bit about the electrical. So I have a sub panel here. This is a sub panel off the main house, has a 100 amp, 240 volt service. And this feeds almost everything in the garage. There's one separate circuit that does the main lights and the door opener, so that I can technically service stuff in this panel and still have a little bit of power in here, but generally everything else is fed off of this. There are a number of circuits just here at the panel, stuff for the mill and the lift and the lathe and things like that. There's also somewhere down here, there's a 20 amp outlet as well for some heavier duty stuff, and as well my welder outlet is down kind of on the lower part of the panel here. And then around the garage, you'll see there's a couple outlets by the workbench, quad boxes. Those are each on their own circuit. And then on the wall here, there's another one up here, one behind there, one over here that are on, these two are on a separate circuit, these two are on a separate circuit, plus those two. So there's quite a bit of electrical in here that I'm never really worried about being able to plug in big tools or anything like that, and lots of expansion here still in the panel. So if I need to add something in the future, I have lots of space. This also feeds down in the basement. There's my big compressor, and we'll talk about air in a second, but it also feeds that down to the basement, so I have a shutoff up here for the compressor. So in addition to that, there's a lot of lights in this garage. You'll see there's 3 here, another 3 across the middle here, and then 2 more over the bench, a couple over actually on the workbench itself, and 1 over the lathe. So there's somewhere close to 50,000 lumen total in the garage. And it's just wonderful not having to grab a light or it being too dim and not being able to see. So something I'd really recommend for people is adding lots of lights to your garage early on. And these cheap LED shop lights are 50 bucks each, maybe even less than that, provide a lot of light and work really well in a garage space. And then, like I said, we'll talk a little bit about air. The compressor's down in the basement. I'll show a shot of that, but it comes up here, 1/2-inch black gas pipe into a bit of a manifold system here. I can actually backfeed the system with a separate compressor here, have a second takeoff as well, and then compressor, filter, and up to a hose reel here, which is probably the main place I get my air from. The other thing it does have is a separate takeoff for the lift. The lift needs air for the lock releases, so there's a separate pickup off that. But it's a pretty simple air setup. There's not like pipes running all the way around the garage or anything like that. It's just kind of contained here. The hose reel pretty much covers what I need for most of the stuff that I do. And then having the compressor in the basement just means it's quiet out here when I'm working. I can actually do stuff and not have a giant compressor kicking on. And it's even just nice to, save the floor space. It would have probably ended up in the corner here and just eaten up that much more space. So saves a bit of space, keeps it quiet, and for my purposes, the amount of air that I use, this has been great doing it this way. Okay, next let's cover the workspaces I have in here. I've shown this in a video before. I'll link a bunch of my videos that I've talked about other pieces of shop infrastructure down in the description, so make sure you check those out. There's a lot of other interesting, more detailed info about some of these things. But I have a 2-foot by 4-foot folding metal workbench that I built myself here. This is usually used for metalworking and things like that. And then the other spot I have is my main workbench here. You've probably seen a lot of my videos that are usually filmed here. I'm trying a little bit of different audio here today. So I have kind of a wireless mic and laptop and stuff, and I'm trying to record the audio that way. Hopefully it works out better. We'll see. But the main workbench is a couple feet deep, almost the full width here. It's around 10 feet wide, plus a couple feet for the sink in the corner here. Hot and cold running water with a sink. Wonderful thing to wash your hands and be able to tidy stuff up just right in the garage without having to go into the house. Again, highly recommended if you can do that. But the workbench is just built with 2x4s and 3/4-inch plywood, spar urethane on the top. This has been 6-7 years now, I think, and I haven't recoated it. This is essentially what I've always had on the workbench surface, and it's held up really well. So one side sanded good plywood, doubled up here. I can always replace the top layer. It's screwed in from the bottom. But with the spar urethane on top, it's held up really well for what I do in here. And then, of course, everybody has a junk corner. So this side of the workbench seems to pile up with stuff. I've done a little bit with the Traxxas X-Max here. If you haven't seen any videos about that, check those out. This thing's cool, although I had some problems with it. But it is occupying a part of my workbench right now just because I've been using it quite a bit. Junk corner, you know how it is though. Then while we're here, let's talk a little bit about storage. The workbench is set up to kind of have some shelving out front here. Most of the cases, if you saw Casemess, the series of videos, I looked through a bunch of these, but cases kind of down here, and then some larger tools, some of my bigger cordless tools, and things like that kind of go under here. Some of the saws and stuff are all stored there. Above the workbench, I built cupboards to match the shape of the wall. You can see there's kind of a bump out here, so kind of different depths of shelving. Most of my cleaning stuff, car wash stuff's in that one, along with some other household things. That's most of the sprays and chemicals and things like fluid film or WD-40 are all in that one. This has kind of been a hodgepodge. It originally was designed just for the computer. I haven't been using that as much lately, but maybe someday I'll redesign this, but as it stands, computer storage. And then finally here is mostly my cordless tools and fasteners. So I'll pop this one open actually, you guys can see. So a bunch of fasteners, and then all of my cordless drills and stuff are in this one. And I guess it's worth probably showing the other ones here too, right? So just filled up with all those typical chemicals and stuff, paints and sprays and all of that sort of thing. And then, like I said, car wash stuff in here and some household chemicals and things like that. Moving on for storage, This is all the wall control pegboard. If you haven't seen it, it's metal panels, and they have both a slot and a regular 1/4-inch pegboard hold in them. So I have 6 panels of it there. There's another couple panels over here on the wall as well. This one's probably a little underutilized still, but quick grab stuff, just misc tools that don't fit in the toolbox, that kind of all goes there on the wall. I do love the wall control pegboard though, it works really well. A lot nicer than the particle board stuff that just tends to fall apart eventually. This stuff's been rock solid. Continuing on for storage space, under here, let me pull this out one second. So underneath there is the chest I built to actually fit specifically under the lathe. And it just has a whole bunch of the more corded tools and nailers and things like that in it. But really good use of space. It's on wheels and it's strong enough that I can sit on it as well. So it ends up being a little bench to sit out here in the garage when I want to. And like I said, adds a whole bunch of storage space. So keeps all these tools out of the way that I tend to use less and less of. The corded tools and nailers and stuff, I tend to use screws and then cordless tools for most of these things now. But good place to store all that. And then next to that in the corner here, I have a 72 compartment bolt bin filled with miscellaneous hardware, all sorts of nuts and bolts and things like that. And then some of those smaller compartment boxes that are above here just have a variety of smaller and different fasteners in them. Up above all of that, I have a big shelving unit here. And so I custom built this. It used to actually have a wood thing here, but when I got the lathe, I needed a spot for the lathe, obviously, and needed to open this up. So I built this out of metal that I could actually clear span all the way across and hold a lot of weight. Up in the top are just all Rubbermaid bins filled with different things. So I've got car parts and abrasives and hand and eye and ear and lung protection, towels, straps, miscellaneous hardware and tools, electrical stuff, just all sorts of miscellaneous stuff that you don't need every single day, but need a place to store. And then below that, there's just some more fasteners and stuff in there, a set of torches, some of the electrical test equipment, and some of the lathe tooling as well. It kind of sits up above there as well. And then finally, toolbox. I've done a full tour on the toolbox, so if you want to go check that out, there is a link in the description as well for this. But this has primarily all of my hand tools and things like that in there. Otherwise for storage, there's stuff up on top of the cupboards. There's things down on the floor and around. The corner here has my folding trailers. That's one of the Harbor Freight 4x8 folding trailers. And things like jack stands and the under hoist stands and things like that are all kind of kept around there. Have a bit of steel storage in the corner here, so all of my kind of cut-offs and scraps of steel are over in here. But a little bit of hodgepodge, whatever kind of fits. You can't always have a perfectly laid out storage mechanism for everything. And the one last thing is on the wall here, I've got a couple 2x4s and use those vinyl hooks to hang all of the garden tools and brooms and shovels and things like that I use more out front. I do have a shed at the back as well that has a few more of those things, the bigger stuff, things like lawnmowers and wheelbarrows. But for the quick grab things that I might use out front every now and then, after, raking the grass after cutting it or something, I have those here. And finally, let's talk major tools, starting with the lift. So there is a Benpack MDS 6KF here in the floor. It's a mid-rise scissor lift. I've done a full video on that, so check it out in the description below. It is really handy to be able to work on vehicles up in the air. It raises about to chest height, so you have enough room to get underneath. But the design of a scissor lift still leaves the wheels in the air, so you can do wheels and suspension and all that sort of stuff, unlike a 4-post lift, for instance. A 2-post would have been nice, but there was some issues with the concrete, mostly that they cut a control joint, you can see it kind of on both sides here, in the floor that prevented me from putting a 2-post without doing concrete work, at which point, since I was going to have to break the floor anyway, I decided to go the in-floor scissor lift route. Other major tools, I have a CraftX milling machine here, so just a small benchtop mill. I'm going to be building a stand for that soon, so watch out for that video. That's actually what this steel on the floor here is for. But behind the mill is the console for the lift, so this has the hydraulics that run down through the floor to the actual lift itself. In behind here I have my welder. It's a Miller Multimatic 215 on my welding cart. This is one of the first things I built that most people build when they buy a welder, is build a cart to put it on. Next to the welder is my drill press, so fairly large floor standing one, not huge, but good for my purposes. And to the left of that is my lathe. It's a CraftX CX701. It's advertised as a 12x28, but it's more like an 11x27, and it's on a stand I built myself as well. This one I can actually jack up and wheel out of here so I can get in behind it if I need to. And it has some storage in the front here as well for different lathe tooling. So that's it for the big tools in here. You'll notice there's no table saw or miter saws or anything like that. Those are actually all down in the basement right now. There isn't really storage space for it up here, and the plan is to store it in the basement, especially once it's finished. I'm hoping to put a little workshop in the basement as well, and that's where some of those things will end up being. Some of those bigger woodworking tools aren't out here, and for the most part in the garage, I'm doing automotive and fabrication type work and less of the woodworking sort of things, so kind of makes sense that they're downstairs. And again, there isn't much storage space here to add them in, so I have to keep them somewhere. Anyway, that's a tour of my garage, or some guy's garage as it were. If you have any questions about anything you've seen in here or noticed, let me know in the comments below. I'd be happy to answer them or maybe do another video on them. Otherwise, if you aren't already subscribed, please consider it. And as always, thanks for watching.